Today, we'll be talking about motivating volunteers, create action throughout the volunteer life cycle. So here's what we'll cover today. Creating action throughout the volunteer life cycle by exploring shifting trends around what motivates people to volunteer. We'll talk about the benefits and challenges of using motivations to tailor your volunteer recruitment messages. And we've also got tips for leveraging motivational styles to supervise, recognize, and effectively retain your volunteers. Stay to the end for some practical tips on motivating volunteers, where we're going to discuss what to do when you don't like what's motivating volunteers, which that'll be kind of an interesting topic of conversation, how to empower volunteers to reflect on their values and motivations, and practical tips on creating a motivations map. So it's going to be a really fun resource for you as well. All right, let's dive in. What is motivation? Elizabeth, I'll let you take it away.
Yeah, so Court always provides us with a really good definition to just help kind of ground us to start. So we're going to address motivation as the reasons someone chooses to act in a certain way. So the condition of being motivated or having a strong reason to act or accomplish something. What is that moment in time? What is that motivation? So Holly, as we start turning it over to you, I think the next three pieces, what creates and affects your volunteers' decision to engage? If you can start telling us a little bit more, and then we'll dive in.
Yeah. Hi, friends. So excited to be here with you. Is my audio okay? You can hear me okay?
Great. Yeah.
Beautiful. So I feel like what's most important here is that in order to volunteer, people need to have desire inside themselves, right? And there's a whole array of these, and they tend to differ widely across generations and cultures. And we'd love to hear some of these in the chat. So I'm wondering, what are internal motivations to volunteer that your volunteers would say? And we don't have any control over these things, right? But on top of having the internal desire, they usually also need to have some kind of outside inspiration, just like Elizabeth was saying about that. They need that moment, that inciting incident. And that might sound like, I saw an ad, I got invited, someone came to speak at my workplace. And because people have a whole array of motivations, we want to be offering for varied opportunities, because we know that volunteers today want choices. So those are a couple of the premises we're kind of working off of.
Yeah, absolutely, Holly. And we know that these motivations, these internal, driving factors, are shifting, and that is something that we've seen a rapid increase in that change. I think in the last 4 to 5 years, but maybe it was already happening. It just increased in speed. And so I guess I'd like to hear from you just a little bit about yourself and your experience and how you got into training and facilitating, and really specifically your interest in volunteer motivations from your experience.
Well, I'm so excited to be here with all of you today. This started being important to me back when I was a volunteer coordinator. It was a food insecurity organization, as Court mentioned, and I ran a lot of one-time events. So people would come in, and it was my conversation starter. Like, what brought you here? Why did you sign up? And I was so fascinated by, people who came for the first time had a lot of different responses. And then when I would ask returners, what keeps you coming back? Why do you keep choosing to do this? It felt like there was an even wider range of responses that they would have. So I I just really loved to ask. I thought it was fun. So when I started working at MAVA as a trainer and facilitator of conversations between volunteer engagement leaders like you all, what was clear to me was that many folks were struggling to recruit volunteers since the pandemic. And they were feeling hopeless. They were feeling like there was just nothing they could do to make a difference. And someone even said the line to me, people don't care about their communities anymore. And they thought, like, the volunteers aren't motivated anymore. Like, what are we going to do? But like, if we can try and turn our judgment into curiosity, like, we know that people still care about their communities. People are still motivated to volunteer. But what can we do? What is our side of the equation? What can we contribute as that external, outside inspiration, inciting moment to make the difference? So I really just started seeing motivations as this lever that we can pull to get people to act or to inspire people to act. So I feel like motivations is kind of where it's at.
Well, so if it's so important, why is it so challenging? Like, let's talk about that. Let's just address maybe the elephant in the room, so to speak. Like, it's not easy. So, what is it that's hard about it?
Yes. Thanks for asking that question, Court. I first want to reinforce that we have a whole spectrum of people here. Like I mentioned, the folks who are like I saw someone say the pandemic did a number on our volunteer pool. And so I'm sure some of you are there. And then I'm sure some of you are in this other place of we have a lot of volunteers coming, but we don't know why. So I think no matter where you're at on the spectrum of having enough volunteers, too many volunteers, or not enough, I think this is helpful. I think what makes this hard in terms of thinking about recruitment specifically, because that's where it starts, right? If we think about the life cycle of a volunteer's time with us, it begins at recruitment. So what's hard about using motivations to tailor your recruitment? Maybe you feel clueless because you don't know what motivates them. Maybe you are feeling frustrated or even resentful because maybe you don't like what you're hearing about what motivates them. And by the way, on the next slide, we're going to ask y'all to think about what is oh, just kidding. This comes with the next one. Why do we always have to cater to volunteers? Maybe you're feeling weary that it's always about what's in it for them. So on the next slide, I want to ask y'all, if we're not caterers, what's a different job metaphor we could come up with? So if we don't know, here's some opportunities. If we don't know, what can we do? If we're clueless, we can ask, right? You all know this. We can ask our current volunteers what motivates you. If it's an interview, if you do screening or interviewing at the beginning, you can ask what's motivating them. If it's longtime volunteers, ask them. You can even use it as an excuse to reach out to past volunteers. You could do it as a survey. You could do it formally or informally, right? You can just casually ask that question starter or conversation starter. What keeps you coming back? Also, the answers to this question can be perfect for social media. You can highlight your opportunities with a little post about this is a picture of Katrina with Katrina's permission. And she said that she keeps volunteering with us because she meets new people and likes to move her body or whatever. So asking, don't forget about just asking them. What if we don't like their motivations? This is a little more nuanced. And we all have our own feelings about this. So I'm wondering, can you put in the chat, what is that motivation that makes you cringe? We all have our own. What is the motivation for you that is I really don't like to hear that one? And mine might be when people would say, I want to help those who are less fortunate. I see people saying service hours, court mandated. Yeah, there's all of these ones that are if I'm thinking about putting value on people's motivations, I don't like this one as much. This feels like the lower value. My mom made me. That's so great. And so what can we do if we're feeling I don't like this? We can get curious. So first of all, get curious with yourself. What is it specifically that I don't like about what they're saying? A couple of questions I like to ask are what is my feeling of injustice or what is my feeling of fear around this? And then you can ask the person some questions if this is happening in conversation. Questions like, tell me more. Or questions like, what do you mean? When you say your mom made you do it, just try and get curious about where they're coming from. And what I found when I remembered to ask, just get a little curious, is sometimes, yes, they keep saying things that bother you. And that is maybe a chance to have a deeper conversation, perhaps with your supervisor, what do we do about this person? But I feel more often you really understand that volunteer better. And sometimes I would even get a cool story from that volunteer about how they used to experience food insecurity as a kid. And they used to hoard food. And so I feel just getting more curious about the volunteer can really help us understand them better and see what they're saying in a different light.
Holly, a really cool thing when I was at one conference, and it was a presentation by, I think it's Chicago Cares, if I'm citing the right one. I think it was Chicago Cares, but they're doing exactly what you said, where part of their program is the volunteer. So like tracking that, I don't like these reasons that are coming through, and we have, 3 volunteers with this reason. They're, they're mandated by, or they're coming through because of service that's required by their school, or they're coming through because they're going to be a hero. And then tracking that, like if in a month or after meeting some of the people that they're working with, or after being on a team, or after having some of the lived experience open in their eyes, did their attitudes change? Did what they want to do next change? Part of that measurable can be really impactful for funding purposes, for grant purposes, but also just to show another value to your volunteer program. You're not just affecting a population that you're targeting to try to help, you're also affecting the volunteers that are saying, we're coming in to help, and you're being to show your leadership, maybe change in attitude, a change in why they're coming back and what they're starting to see as they're there more and more. I think that's the type of story, like you were talking about when you say story, like that's such a powerful story if you can measure it and be thinking about it intentionally to see, how are we actually helping our volunteers just as much as they're contributing.
That's beautiful, Elizabeth, when we have the conversation about like, what do we measure? I've never thought of that. I've never heard of that, but I love the idea of measuring what people say their motivations are and what they're trying to get out of the opportunity even. Thank you for that. Okay, so now I'm wondering if we can try a different metaphor. We're saying, I'm tired of asking like, what do you want? What's in it for you? And so maybe caterer is not the right job metaphor. So I'm wondering if we can all like little thought experiment. What is a job metaphor that resonates for you? If you don't want to be a caterer, like passing around like, I don't know, shrimp or something saying, do you want this? Do you want this? What is a different job metaphor? Maybe you want to be an architect building something beautiful that people can like enter. Maybe you want to be a road construction, like a road construction worker, building like on ramps to your mission. Or I'm thinking about like a DJ. So you're trying to find the right songs that are going to get people excited and on the dance floor. Ashley, an influencer. Yeah, right. We want to influence people to join us, and we want to hopefully create content that makes them excited to be part of what we're saying. Ooh, matchmaker, Megan. That's great. Okay, thanks for thinking about those, friends. And then for some of us who feel overwhelmed because there's so many different motivations, another way to think about it is like, maybe that's not a bad thing. Maybe that is like the best case scenario because there are the most possibilities for people to enter and get plugged into our mission. A conductor. That's so great. Thanks, friends, for your creativity in the chat.
Yeah, I like that one because it takes all of the different instruments that have different tone, sound, personality to bring something together that couldn't be done with just one kind of instrument. And so that one really works for me when it comes to kind of feeling like the depth of what you could have.
Well said. So thinking more about tailoring and thinking more about, okay, we have lots of different motivations. What do we do with that? We could go a little deeper here. And just to be clear, when we're talking about like recruitment messaging or like using these in messages, I'm thinking about like a sentence, a headline, something that would be great for social media. So we're not talking about, a whole like proposal. We're talking about like, what is your sentence? What's your hook? And regarding targeting different motivations geographically, this is especially the case for those of you who have programs that are spread out. Maybe you have like multiple sites, so you're asking people to volunteer who are coming from different communities, maybe even like a statewide program or even bigger. And the question is, thinking about those specific communities, what are the messages that might resonate with them? And Elizabeth, I know you have a great example of this, so I'm going to ask you in just a moment. One example I heard is the Minnesota Master Gardener Program through the University of Minnesota has 6 organizational priorities like pollinators, clean water, growing produce for people to eat, And so they realized based on the parts of Minnesota that they're trying to find people to, join their mission, is they can look at that part of Minnesota, like what is going to matter to them. So probably not clean water in the part of Minnesota where I grew up, where there is none of the 10,000 lakes. And looking at, if I'm looking at this community, which of my priorities are going to matter to them? What about that example you had, Elizabeth?
I know, I think when we were talking earlier, you reminded me of, it was a state parks lecture I was at, and I was talking about, you have to think about your messaging too for people who want to help in different ways. So you need to target them based on how they might be inclined to help. So the example I had given was, there were pictures of this Easter egg hunt that had been taken place in one of the state parks, and it was a big driver for that park and bringing in volunteers. And I was taking that example of an Easter egg hunt, and I'll pick on my children. I have one daughter who is very organized. She would love to be part of the crew that stuffs those eggs and puts that thing together and does it probably color coded. She's that child. I have another one that would do 5 and be bored. So with her, like, she's going to want to hide the eggs, but she's not going to want to stuff them. And then there's that moment of the person like myself who gets to have the joy of my children in my life all the time, that maybe I don't want to be the wrangler at the event. I'll help with that, but I don't want to be with the actual children. So like that moment of, and I'm being facetious, but that moment of like, each one, you've got to target. Not only do they want to help, but I might not want to stuff the eggs, but I'll help park cars. I might not want to be with the children, but I can help set up and clean up afterwards. So those moments of really thinking task-wise too, how do our different personalities, talents, how do we take something and break it into those pieces where I can know what I'm signing up for, because I'm really scared to have to deal with those kids, but I am perfectly fine being there for cleanup. And if I can see I get to do cleanup, then I'll sign up for it. If I can't tell, then is my motivation to help going to be hurt by the fact that I don't want to get in over my head. I don't want to do the thing I don't enjoy. That detail for recruitment really matters.
Yes, thank you so much for highlighting that. And I'm loving what people are saying in the chat about tasks, not roles. Thanks, Chris. And I feel like this is even a part of what we're going to talk about next regarding the whole life cycle of the volunteer. I'm also thinking about experimenting with different motivations over time. I feel like the key word here is experimenting, because you don't have to like create this huge campaign. You could think about, what's one tweak that I could try with one message, and what's one motivation I would like to try and incorporate into my hook. And I would love to hear in the chat like some examples of like one short message that you've used that you feel good about. Because I feel like examples are super helpful, and y'all are experts on this. So try something for a little while and see if you notice that people are resonating with that message, and then maybe in 3 months, tweak it, try a slightly different message, and see if that's resonating. Also, this idea of adjust your language based on group values and views. We think about generations here. We think about even views and values differing across communities, cultures. One example based on generations is, I heard recently, I was a volunteer coordinator at a mentoring organization who talked about how they have to market their opportunities differently to different generations. For the older folks who they're mostly pulling from faith-based contexts, they need to use the word volunteer, because those folks are looking for the word volunteer. That is a word that they value. It means something to them. For their younger, like Gen Z outreach, they have dropped the word volunteer, and they have had a lot more success with a new role that they are calling community engagement team member. I don't know why I did the quotes, but that's what it's called. And so they found that these different groups are valuing different things about this message. It's really the same kind of role that they're advertising for, but different folks are resonating with different ways to talk about it.
Holly, I was just going to share, and AK, you may think about this too, but AK and I hosted like an internal, just for our volunteer management clients, like a lunch and learn about how to use AI to help with some of this, because some of the really easy adaptations of AI is using one of the chat GPT or whichever one that you've looked into, to just put in a message and say, make this appropriate for a teenager. So if you have a good one and you just want to test changing it for a different audience, use words that a teenager would enjoy. Make this something that's going to be good for a retiree. And just that prompt actually just rewrote in our example really fast. And it just was like, oh, if I have a good message, this is how I get those language choices for the audience I'm thinking about quickly done. And it's not going to be that thing that just pulls us down. And it does. I think, you have to look into your own policies. I don't want to take us too much far off of this, but I think that is one of those really important things that ChatGPT and some of the others, a prompt can really help you with these personas and different targets and different motivations. You have to do the due diligence. It's a computer helping you, so read it. But that moment of it really can expedite this work and let you have 4 messages instead of just one in the same period of time, which I love.
Yeah, and we've got some resources on our blog for that too. If you're like, how do I get started using AI? We've got a guide specifically for volunteer engagement professionals who are writing volunteer opportunities, how you can get started using that. So that's something that we can help you with that resource as well.
Awesome idea. It reminds me of a contact at a library who was advertising advertising opportunities to high schoolers. And she let them fall into 2 categories. She said, you can volunteer with friends or you can volunteer with headphones. She knew what she learned about high schoolers was that they don't want to do something by themselves for the first time. That's scary. Maybe I'll be more comfortable if I can bring my friend. Oh, I can volunteer with my friends. Awesome. And then there's those high schoolers who have hours that they need to put in for something, and they're introverts and they just want to put in some headphones and listen to some music and get the thing done well. And so she found that was a way to adjust the language based on what high schoolers are looking for.
I love that. It's brilliant and super fun too.
Right. And then refreshing your message. So just this idea that a message for volunteer recruitment shouldn't be the one message you use forever. There's probably, your mission is that. But when you think about an evergreen message, this stuff is all evolving and changing because people are evolving and changing. So your message should too. And so you can try different things, but just think about, how can I make this fresh? I've been using, this one that y'all put in the chat for a while. Let me tweak it and try it another way. Also, we know that when we see the same thing over and over, for example, like a Facebook ad, even if it's an organization we care about, it becomes invisible when it's the same over and over. So if you experiment with making something look differently, that will catch the eye, even to the people who are already bought into your mission.
Yeah, absolutely. I love paying attention to those little nuances because you can actually pick up on trends just by listening to people and start using that in some of your writing when you're talking about your opportunities or on social media, and really pick up on those things early because you hear them being spoken on site. All right, let's dive into some more tips for maybe leveraging these motivational styles to kind of get some of these very specific volunteer engagement tasks that have to be done. Let's talk about supervising, recognizing, and retaining volunteers by leveraging motivational styles.
All right, so we're moving through this volunteer life cycle, and we're thinking about, okay, let's say we have volunteers who are already engaged. How do we keep them motivated? And here's just some ways to think about this. Basically, we want them to be thoughtful about their service. So what keeps you coming back to volunteer? I feel like that communicates that we're still interested in your motivations. We're still interested to know if this is a place you want to continue being. We're not just expecting that you came once and now we've got you. We still care about how you feel about being here. Yes, listen to them, ask them. Great idea, Chris. So even asking, how meaningful? Do you feel like your role is meaningful to you? This can be a great way to open a conversation about whether or not the role is a good fit for them. How meaningful is your volunteer role? We're not assuming that they started a role and it's good as long as we don't hear any problems. We want to purposefully ask, is this role matching up with what motivated you to be here? Does this feel like a good fit? How could we make your experience even better? I see you as a collaborator and a partner. And so we're here together, and especially if this is someone who's motivated by having influence or collaborating, they're going to love this question and they will have great ideas for improving your program. And even thinking about, the life cycle, I'm not sure how we would refer to someone who's a past volunteer is in the volunteer life cycle, but thinking about them too, like taking the time to reach out to say, hey, it's been a while. There's no pressure here, but we're just wondering, like, what made you choose to leave? Like, what were the motivations that brought you here? And we're curious about what made you choose to leave. We're trying to do better. And you had some great points about this, Elizabeth.
I think it's a balancing act, because I think there's a moment of authenticity and truth that you'll get from someone that you have to weigh. They are going to be possibly your negative voice, so you can't let that linger too much in your ear. But that moment of, they're going to tell you like it is. And I think, Holly, I like the way you phrased that. What would have made the experience more meaningful? What would have made this something better for you that I can incorporate for future volunteers? And I think they'll come to that conversation, because most people still want to improve. They came there because that cause mattered to them. So you're not trying to keep them. I think it's setting the expectation. I'm not trying to win you back, but I want to make sure that I never make the same mistake twice. I want to learn. So I like that. I think the other thing to keep in mind is that balance. You want to listen and learn there, but you want to put your time into making sure that you apply those learnings to your current volunteer pool, to the new volunteer, to the person who's currently there that needs to feel more meaningful and more impactful. So I do think you need to weight it. Just be careful you don't chase the ones that are leaving so hard that you're not implementing what you're learning for those who are coming in fresh, that you have a higher percentage chance of keeping and growing and doing it right with, versus kind of throwing good time after bad, because you've lost that person. They might change their mind in your conversation. That's fantastic, but that's not the point of the conversation. Make sure it's going to just be a learning experience for you, and then apply what you learn.
That's a perfect caveat, Elizabeth. Thank you so much. And I also think that Chris just put a great button on this point. Past volunteers can always become future volunteers. Maybe that you just need to change the opportunity for their changing motivations. So thank you for that really smart thought.
Also, too, sometimes your motivations might shift when your life shifts a little bit. Like the person might have a new job, they might have had to move. They might have a shift in their family. And so they might still care about the cause, but their motivation to volunteer in the specific role they had been in might be, they might not be able to fulfill that specific motivation. So they might need a new role, and that they might not have known that was available to them. When I look at these questions, Holly, what really kind of washes over me is just how much responsibility there is for volunteer engagement professionals to hold space for these like really important and sometimes challenging or uncomfortable conversations. So there's like this part of me that just wants to be like, this is really important for everyone to get together for experiences like this, trainings, conferences, and all of that, because I think it really builds that resiliency in each person to be able to go, okay, I could breathe deep and I can kind of like head into these conversations knowing I'm not the only one having them with my volunteers. I don't know if anyone else is feeling that way, but I'm just like, wow, look at everybody holding space for these really vulnerable at times conversations and transparency and truth. So I just kind of want to honor that for a moment.
Love that. So this idea of a motivations map kind of comes from, in one of our previous points, we mentioned motivational styles. So, you can think about motivation like that internal thing that led them to start volunteering. But the idea of a motivational style is, what if this is more like a personality trait? What if this is more like a set of like characteristics that I came here because I wanted community, and now I'm going to be looking for community through all of my interactions with this organization. And especially if we are using a motivation to recruit volunteers, like, someone said, volunteering with us helps you grow. Like, okay, so maybe they came because they are interested in self-development. So how can you think about motivating that person through self-development? How can you appreciate them through that lens? And how might that motivation shift over time? So I'm wondering, I also have one more thing for you. There's a lot of different ways we can think about motivations. There's really interesting theories. So there's one great theory you might want to look into called self-determination theory. SDT is the acronym. And that says that people are most motivated when they have autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So they want to feel like they have some influence. They want to feel good at what they're doing. And they want to feel like they have some kind of like ability to change it. Also, there's a handout from Mava on another theory called McClellan's motivational theory, which says that people fall into three camps: achievers, affiliators, and power influence. And so based on those three camps, achievers might be more motivated by goals and checklists. And here's the handout also has some examples of like, here's what appreciation might look like for this person. Affiliators are going to be more motivated by interpersonal relationships. They might be looking for community in how they're appreciated and how they're supervised. And power influence folks are more motivated by having influence and perhaps by being recognized in a public way. So there's a fun little quiz in the handout. We hope you check that out and kind of get creative with it. So thinking about a common motivation for someone to start volunteering, I'm wondering if y'all would put something in the chat. The exercise, you could do 3 different motivations, but think of just one and pop it in the chat. What's one common motivation that folks have when they come to start volunteering with you? Carrie's asking, was there a handout? There will be a handout. It's coming. Okay. Pop them in the chat. Joining community, meeting new people. I think about someone who comes because they've retired. They retired and now they're like, I'm looking for something to do. Okay, so now think about with this person and give them a name. It could be a real name or a made up name, just to help it feel more like a person that you're thinking about. Who is this person? What's their name? Put it in the chat if you want. I think the name I'm thinking of is Frank. Frank just retired. Ralph. Great job, Gina. So, okay, think about your person. You have a person with a motivation. What does motivating them as a supervisor look like based on why they came? So my friend who is retired, Frank, motivating Frank as a supervisor might look like, Frank, like, how are you doing with all of your free time? Like, I want to know how this transition in your life is going. If I think about Frank and how Frank might like to most be appreciated, perhaps Frank is looking for more community as a retired person. His whole identity in life has changed. So maybe we will do more opportunities, like an appreciation event that's an outing, or appreciation event that is like, let's all get together. What did Frank do in his former life? That is such a great point, that when we're thinking about this person, who are they? Where did they come from? And this is a exercise that comes from the marketing world. And it really comes from like, who are my target people and how do I get to them and what makes sense for them? So it's kind of just a thought exercise. And how might their motivation shift with time? So Frank came to us because he retired, but maybe at some point, Frank is like, I need to slow down. And my ability to do this physical work is changing. So my motivation has shifted. So there's kind of just this idea of asking especially if I'm advertising a particular motivation, how can I make sure that we're leveraging that through the whole time they're with us and that it's not a bait and switch? Yes, Sir Garen, this is exactly like a consumer map. That's such a good point. I'm wondering, for Elizabeth, what is coming up for you about this volunteer life cycle and following the motivation all the way through?
Well, I'm thinking of a few different specific sort of situations that I've been in myself. And one was working with a volunteer who was, had been at the organization volunteering since longer than I had been there. And they were retired. They had actually, I found out, been doing the same volunteer shifts twice a week for 27 years and had been there longer than most people who worked there. And they were reaching a point in their life where they wanted to do something different, but they felt like they couldn't. And they felt like they couldn't say anything because they thought no one else could do this because they had been doing this for so long. And it was a very specialized set of skills. So having a conversation with them, finding out that their motivations had changed, they maybe felt somewhat appreciated, but also felt like no one really wanted to ask them because they were like, just leave that person to do that thing because it's such a specialized skill set. We don't really want to touch it or mess with it, And so just in having that conversation and realizing that that person's motivations had really shifted, their priorities in their life had shifted, we really kind of came to determine that there might be somebody else who was good for that role and we just didn't know yet. And that shifting them for a very specific amount of time into a mentorship role to train somebody else was the ideal thing to do. We actually found 2 people to replace that person, and we're able to move them into a type of volunteerism that work better for the place in their life that they were. So to me, that's a pretty long volunteer life cycle that I just kind of was a part of at the very end. Of moving that person into a new situation. But clearly they were devoted, clearly they cared, and clearly they still wanted to be there. But it was definitely having a number of conversations about it to really kind of check in with how things had shifted for that person, in the previous 2 years of their 27-year service. So
thank you, Court, for that example. Elizabeth, are you going to pop in?
Yeah, I'm glad you went first, Court, because I caught up on the chat, and I think there's actually a good example here that's relevant to what I was thinking about. Was Emerald brought up that, sometimes, you have a task that isn't going to fit for them because you do have to lift tables or do setup. And I think part of a motivations map and creating this persona may be thinking about, and now it's where I'm going to go away from what you were sharing, Emerald, but that moment of, if, let's say you've got plenty of people there to instruct in the art project and to help with the class, but you don't have anyone who can lift more than 20 pounds. So that setup and take down the tables is just not going to fit them. Part of this persona may be thinking about, okay, I need to attract more volunteers for this task. What does that persona look like from a marketing standpoint? I do need to lead with, we need help with this, taking down the tables afterwards. You need to be able to do 20 pounds of lifting, whatever it might be. And then thinking about, how do I find who's probably maybe a little younger than my current pool of volunteers? How do I create that persona that would be motivated to support this group that really needs someone a little younger to help with the day of project? So it's, again, thinking about not what you have only, but what you've got maybe just a little of, and you wish you had a lot more of that persona, that you can think about, how did I find them? That word choice you said, Holly, with the headphones, like what would resonate with the different persona that I'm trying to attract more of, and start in-house, who do you have like them that you need more of? But it may be just trying some things to attract a pool that you've never been able to tap before, but being very specific. We cannot continue our art classes without someone to help us break down the tables afterwards. This is a desperate need. What would make this work for you? And maybe it's being flexible yourself, that they don't get taken down in that hour. They have to be taken down after hours. But would you be able to find someone who could help then? So thinking it through and how you might be able to change things to attract a new persona to help motivate them to take part.
Great point. One more thing on this is, we know that their motivations shift with time. So imagine those folks who come because their mom made them. Imagine the folks who come because they think something about the organization that's not quite, that's kind of, they made it up, or it's something that's not in line with what the role actually is. And then imagine that, they start volunteering, and then over time they realize, oh, now my motivation is that I love the people. Now my motivation is, I see that the need is over here, and that matches with my skill set. So even if, I think it's a great example too of, if Frank, for example, comes in with a motivation that is like, we don't like, that can change over time as he experiences what we're doing.
Yeah, I love that one. And I've actually seen that happen a lot, Holly. Like people, when folks become more educated about the cause, they can be more empowered to have a different experience internally. And that's really exciting to have happen.
Okay, so with our volunteers, we want to normalize that their motivations will change. And so what this means, I feel like the theme of what we've been talking about is open communication and having conversations with them. Establish that at the beginning and say, we're so excited that you came to be with us, and we're going to keep talking about how you feel about being here. And we know that eventually this might not be the right thing for you anymore. Or at the beginning, you tell them, let us know if this is no longer the right thing. Let us know if this becomes too much. It's okay to say, I need a break. It's okay to say, this doesn't line up anymore. I would so much prefer to have that conversation with you than for you to just ghost us because we care about you. So I feel like establishing open communication is huge around like normalizing that our motivations are going to change. That makes it okay for you to ask and okay for them to tell you. And then encouraging them to dabble. I really like this idea that they don't have to feel locked in. They don't have to feel like, hey, I'm doing this role and now I'm stuck. And I think so many of us have had this experience of like, I can't leave this role because now I am irreplaceable. And folks, no one on your team should be irreplaceable. That is a sign that there's some work, some investigation that needs to go on about like why do we feel this way and how can we make this more sustainable for everyone so that this person can move on, try something else, and even to convince that volunteer you are irreplaceable, and that is a problem. That is not the best case situation for us because you're not going to be able to do this forever. So there is that idea of encouraging them to dabble because you shouldn't be irreplaceable, because it's great to try new things. You might find something else you like even better, and they'll realize something new about the organization no matter what if they try something different. And also kind of takes the pressure off. You don't have to find the perfect role right away. And this idea of mandating rest, it's really just tied up in this, like volunteer motivations will change. Volunteers' lives are going to change. Their abilities are going to change. And we want to make sure to see that coming and to try and help them avoid burnout. So mandating rest is trying to help them avoid burnout. I heard from one volunteer coordinator at a Humane Society who said, there is a limit of the number of shifts someone can do per week. And the volunteers are like, why? I want to walk the dogs every day. And she said, we have this rule in place because if you burn out, no one will be here to walk the dogs and you care about them so much. So it's really better to have this limitation so that this whole thing is more sustainable and because rest is so important. Another example of this is checking in every so often, like, do you need a break? Do you need to take a sabbatical? Would you like the summer off? Because you're not irreplaceable, because we need you to rest, you're a person. Lots of stuff in the chat about checking in, so important. Succession planning, thanks for that point, Hannah. That's totally in line with this idea of dabbling and not having irreplaceable folks. Permission to take a break, so important.
Should we pop on to the next one?
Let's do it.
All right, here's where we turn all of the tips into action steps. Why don't you walk us through some of these?
All right, I'll start with the top one for us, Court. Create a culture of thoughtful engagement by prompting volunteers to self-reflect on their motivations. That actually does tie into what I said earlier. It probably wasn't a moment of brilliance on my part. I probably just remembered it from this slide. So there we go. But I do think this part of self-reflection, I'm seeing that built into so many more programs where they've intentionally left time at, you can't do this every shift, but intentionally trying to have some activities where at the beginning of it, the group as a whole is just taking 5 minutes, 10 minutes to reflect on who they know that has been affected by this, whatever you're working on, or a cause, why that cause matters to them, why they're there that day, what are their initial perceptions. And then that self-reflection can be just a space afterwards where you've again held time just to say, like, was something here that surprised you today? Did you learn something today you didn't expect? Did you feel like something you had hoped to do finally happened and you were able to accomplish it? So they have that part of just self-reflection afterwards. And I think, again, that can tie into that measurement of what's changing in their self, as well as in what they're trying to work on for a cause that they care about. I think that just pieces there are so important, because otherwise, if you don't take that moment, we're all so busy. They're back to whatever else they're doing. They're not taking that moment to realize, oh, wait, I expected this and I saw that. What does that mean? And then coming back again and thinking through, am I starting my next shift with a different headspace because of what I expect this time around? So yeah, very important.
And then when we think about this idea of trying motivation mapping to grasp the significance of the motivations across the volunteer life cycle, this is something you could do alone. Just like think about drawing a line. This is why they come. This is maybe how this person would like to be supervised, recognized, etc. And you could also ask a coworker who you would really like to have as a thought partner, like, hey, can we try this idea of motivation mapping and like help me think about our personas that exemplify like our key people, like, or the people we want to attract. And also, I think it could be a fun exercise to do with volunteers and really even just like reach out to a few of them to say, can we try this together? Do you want to get together? And that could start a cool conversation about what can we do differently to bring more folks in. I saw someone who was mentioning this idea about what if you only have a couple of opportunities? I think this could be a cool way to think about another opportunity that could already exist within what you're doing that the right person could really love. And we all think about how, like, the task that I least want to do would be someone else's favorite thing. And maybe it's something I could pilot with one person who's interested in that. So the whole point here is not to think about I need to do everything differently, but what's one thing I can try or one thing I can do differently?
And just for a second there, Holly, I remember from my previous webinar, it was just that point too, like what's something that eats up your time that you don't love, that if you could just delegate it to a volunteer, to Holly's point, that they're gonna love it, but it gives you back time for something that only you can do, where if you can get that off your plate, they're gonna enjoy it and it's off your plate. Now you've got time that you can reinvest where you need to put yourself, because you're also the person that's overextended and needs rest at times.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen a lot of volunteer leaders start finding those younger volunteers who love social media and that they can get themselves out of that business and really focusing on doing some other things that help build relationships in different ways. So there's some creative solutions out there. And we're going to send you the recording on Monday. You'll get the slides, tons of follow-up resources, plus a very special handout from MAVA's Volunteer Impact Leadership Training that's going to help you discover your own motivational style in the Volunteer Motivations Quiz. So that'll be a really fun thing to work through. And I think we have a little bit of time for questions. How's that sound, Holly?
Yeah. Let me start by addressing something I was seeing here about like hospice having really intense onboarding. I feel like this idea of changing motivations can also point to like trying to have roles that someone could just dip their toe, because you might have a persona, if you're thinking about a hospice scenario, of someone who they're interested in admin work, they're interested in doing something in the office, and so they come and it's not a huge lift to be onboarded into that perhaps, and then they fall in love with the organization, and then at that point, now that they've dipped their toe, now that they know more about you, they're interested in like shadowing someone in a hospice situation. They're interested in going a little deeper or doing that next intensive onboarding to actually become a volunteer in the hospice setting. So dipping your toe, yes, super important to have another way in.
Yeah, that's such a great example. I think Beth mentioned that in a previous webinar too about Beth Steinhorn, which you could see in our library, our webinar library. But about instead of the one museum, instead of all the paintings that the docents originally had to do, she said that they started by training docents on one painting. And they would have that person stay stationary versus, and then people moving through versus one docent taking someone through everything. And that was one way that they could lower the bar of entry to getting somebody onboarded and start kind of getting that feeling of like, how can I, get that tactile feeling of being in the flow of this volunteer opportunity without having such a huge piece of training. So just one thing. I bet we have a lot of questions.
Yeah, if you want to grab another question, Court, I'll give us some time. I saw one program in here that reminds me of one in our area called Alongside Families. But same thing, there's an intensive training because if you're coming in kind of like a respite care for someone who you're trying to prevent entry into having to be in the foster system. So how do you surround a family when they're going through crisis? But it was giving other ways to help because it was a big commitment to go to a full day of training to be able to actually have, the child in your home. But to be able to come alongside, you could just deliver a meal to the family that's going to have a new child in their home for that weekend to help take some of that burden off. So it was giving that same principle you talked about, Holly, where what's something that doesn't require as much, but lets them feel like they're affecting the cause, doing something simple to support it. Now they're part of your advocacy network, and maybe they're going to keep talking about your program. They'll never be the person that goes through the full training, but they may be bringing friends, family, others in their sphere in to do the full training because they still are involved with you. They're getting your newsletter. They're doing a very minimal task because they didn't go through the full training, but they're part of your network now. And that voice is important to pull in more people. Up there too. Did you see a question, Court, or anything you want to raise up?
I see Nathan asking about the motivational theories. The first one I talked about, which I just mentioned, was self-determination theory. And this is a very long link. Sorry, AK, I should have given it to you to enter for folks. That does a beautiful job talking about harnessing self-determination theory with volunteers. And then the other one that the handout is going to have in it is motivation theory by a guy named McClelland. And I think when you get that, that will be ammo to look up more on this theory. They're both pretty simple. There's other more intense theories on motivation that can also be insightful. So even just Googling like motivation theories, if you're thinking about this, could yield some interesting thoughts.
Let's see what other, we've got 5 minutes left. So I bet we could take at least one more question. All right. So we talked about the motivational theories. And then how do you help program staff understand and train how to motivate volunteers to help with volunteer retention? So maybe people who aren't, I'm guessing this question might be about people who aren't directly coordinating the volunteers, but maybe the rest of the organization. How can you kind of train them on getting on board with volunteer motivation?
I feel like the answer to so many of these things is have a conversation. And I think that even the advice I've heard on how to get your coworkers or teammates bought into what you're doing is to get together and think about what could volunteers be doing for us? And even starting with like, what are they contributing that we're measuring already? What are they contributing that is unmeasurable? Like they come in with energy that we don't have and they're not even being paid for it. And so thinking about how to get them on board with motivations could be super similar. Like, what motivates you to volunteer? And what do you think are the top motivations for our volunteers here? Even trying the persona exercise. I feel like if you can have people in that thought partnership step, like the thinking about it step, they're going to be so much more excited about everything else you do after that because they were there at the beginning helping come up with ideas or strategies. I don't know if either of you have other things to add about that.
I think that's right, Holly. It's starting the conversation. It's asking them to thank a volunteer that they see on site so that volunteer feels appreciated while they're there. I know, Court, you have a great example of sometimes what the staff thinks the volunteer is there for and what the volunteer is there for doesn't always match. Sometimes it feels like it's making more work for the staff to clean up after the volunteers. But if the point was to bring in new blood, new faces, new advocates, then just making sure the staff understands. We know we're not going to get as much done because they don't have your experience. So we may have to clean up after them tomorrow. But today, our point was we want to bring in these people and show them that our cause matters, that they can contribute, that this is important work. That's why they're coming, not because we're trying to get all of this organized. So I think that piece of just communication, and then helping, that greeted by name, thanked for being there. Sometimes that person smiling and just saying, "Oh, I'm so glad you made it, Holly." Like they know your name, they know you're there. That matters. That's that community reinforcement that they matter. And I think a volunteer wants to matter. They want to know what they're doing matters.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge part of the feeling and what we see over and over again is that the reason people come is because of a sense of community. That's a driving motivation that people is part of our humanity, the sense of community. And so even if you are a staff that's not directly working with volunteers, maybe like training them that when you pass a volunteer in the hall that you say, "Hey, thanks for volunteering," and you just go on about your business. You don't necessarily have to engage in a big way, but kind of walking by without talking, that can feel uncomfortable for a brand new volunteer who might not know how busy that other staff member is or what they have to do that might be really important right now. So just kind of like that, "Hey, thanks for being here." That takes 2 seconds and kind of getting on board with that can, I think, make a big difference in the community feeling surrounding that. So we are right here at the top of the hour with 60 seconds left. And I just want to say a huge thank you to Holly Daniels, the training director at Minnesota Alliance for Volunteer Advancement. We love MAVA and we're so grateful at Get Connected to be able to partner with MAVA to bring you volunteer engagement professional resources. And again, if you're not sure who we are, we're Get Connected by Galaxy Digital, and we're a network of over 50,000 nonprofits and 2 million volunteers on our volunteer management technology solutions. We've got solutions for every program size, type of organization, and budget. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you can reach out to us at info@galaxydigital.com. We'd also encourage you to take a peek at our learning center at galaxydigital.com/blog. We have got thousands of resources for volunteer engagement professionals. So if you've got a question, type it into the search bar on that blog and see what comes up, because we've got articles, we've got videos, we've got a full webinar library for you to support you in the work that you are doing each and every day. And we know that volunteer leaders are some of the busiest people. And so we just want to thank you for spending an hour with us today. We will send you the recording and the follow-up resources, and we look forward to getting together again with you next month on April 11th, where we will have Faiza Van Zant, who's the executive director of the Council for Certification in Volunteer Administration, joining us for a special webinar topic on volunteer recognition, how to recognize and motivate volunteers in diverse settings. So that's going to be a great one. We had Faiza back in January, so we're excited to have her back this April. I hope to see you all there. And we'll be having Holly back also later this year for some more excellent volunteer engagement resource sharing here on the webinars, Get Connected webinars. So again, thank you so much to Holly. Thanks to Elizabeth and AK, and thank you to all of you for being here. And please look for that email coming from us to you in your inbox on Monday morning. We will see you next time.
It was so fun to be with you.
Thank you, Holly. It was amazing. Bye, everyone. Thank you for being here today.